Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, all our viewers out there. Just two points to raise today. Just India and Nigeria. First of all, we keep up with Hyundai. Hyundai is looking to list an IPO in India's market. India's market, of course, has been on a massive bull run. I mean, look, what else can we say about India and how attractive it would be? They're looking to raise between $2.5 to $3 billion. 17.5% of the company. We haven't seen an IPO in the automobile sector in India since, I think, about Suzuki about 20 years ago. And they're looking at a valuation of about $30 billion. So again, it's another addition to India's market. It's another, part of the growth story in India. And so, they filed already the paperwork. And so we'll see, what happens when that listing takes place. We didn't have enough time yesterday. You didn't think I was going to let President Buhari's quotes on population just slide like that, and I wouldn't talk about it. We're gonna get into that. So let's get into the president's quotes with respect to the issue of population, where he says that this is a problem that needs to be addressed and that there needs to be essentially more investments in education and healthcare. Of course, as Mr. Emmanuel Feni pointed out correctly yesterday, what did he do over the past 8 years? But still, he still spoke the truth. Now, I'll remind you, of course, of President Jonathan as well. Remember, this was either last week or 2 weeks ago when we were talking about, things that he had tried to do in the past and how he had also tried to address the issue of population in Nigeria, but was pushed back. But there's one more. You've got two presidents now that have mentioned this issue. Let's go to Ni Yusuf. Ni Yusuf is the chair of the NESG, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Arise News was part of this macroeconomic report that they had put out not too long ago. Here's what he said. Please pay attention to him saying that we need to tame Nigeria's population.
In 2023, Nigeria experienced fragile economic growth characterized by escalating inflationary pressure, exchange rate depreciation, and fiscal constraints. With a growing population, and that's something we need to tame, these challenges continue to impede prosperity, hinder productivity growth, curtail the real sector, and of course, diminish the positive impact of growth outcomes on the overall quality of life of the average Nigerian.
So, if we're keeping score, that's two past presidents and the chair of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group that says we need to tame Nigeria's population because of the impact that this is having on the rest of the economy. Let's go back to President Buhari's quote one more time. He did say that there needs to be investments in healthcare and education. And you have to ask, Mr. President, what investments did you make? Let's put some images of students sitting on floors in schools. Simple, if you just Google Nigerian pupils on floors, you will get reports from Nasarawa, from Ogun State, from Lagos. So the population essentially is putting stress on education infrastructure to where there are not enough teachers, in fact, not enough infrastructure to be able to attend. So this is a supply and a supply issue, right? But at the same time, it's like you're trying to balance two things, like balancing an equation. On the other hand, you're still reproducing more children, and there's not enough to get into the schools. Does anyone know the student benchmark for pupil to teacher ratio? So the numbers essentially coming from UNESCO, the benchmark is supposed to be 35-1. As of 2018, according to the Basic Education Commission, it was over 80-1 in certain geopolitical zones. Zeus knows what those numbers will be by 2022 or 2023 because of how populations have grown since then. What about healthcare? The president also said that we should basically invest in healthcare. I remind you of a quote quote from the president of the Nigerian Medical Association, Dr. Ojima Uche. This was in October of 2022, where he says, at this juncture, I leave to your imagination the number of actively licensed physicians in Nigeria's relative to those registered to practice at as stated above. Available data places it around 24,000, giving a horrible true ratio of approximately 1 to 10,000. The ratio of 1 to 10,000 is a national average, but in most states, the situation is palpably worse, meaning that those numbers would actually, the ratio is actually worse. Take a look at the second quote from the president of the Nigerian Medical Association, where he continues. This was at a media gathering back in October 2022. Only one doctor is incredibly available to treat about 30,000 patients. In some states in the south, while states in the north are worse, as one doctor to 45,000 patients. In some rural areas, patients have to travel more than 30 kilometers from their abodes to get medical attention where available, thus making access to healthcare a rarity. So you've got stress on the education system, you've got stress on the healthcare system. Now, let's take a look at an incredible stat here for sub-Saharan Africa. Fertility, right, which is births per woman. This is data from the World Bank. We pulled this up as of 2022. You will see Niger, where there is a military junta, right? And they don't have enough food to feed their own populations. They are leading at 6.7 births per woman. In second place, oh wow, no surprise, it's Chad. Chad is in second place at 6.2. You've got the Democratic Republic of Congo, 6.1. You've got the Central African Republic, 5.9. Angola, 5.2. Nigeria, 5.1. Burundi at 5. But now, what do these countries have in common? This is a mind-blowing thing. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest poverty on planet Earth in terms of regions. So not only do you have the highest poverty in your region, but you also have the highest rate of fertility. So you are breeding like rabbits and hamsters, and you don't even have the money to be able to attend to your population. Is there any surprise as to why there is insecurity? Is there any surprise as to, I didn't even mention the police to population ratio. I mean, it goes on. Conditional cash transfers in Nigeria. How much money is going to be able to attend to them? Look at the stat from the World Bank in terms of the number of people that were pushed into poverty by inflation. This is in Nigeria. They estimated 5 million during the COVID period. If you go through, I think it was further back, about 8 million through a longer period. You haven't even pulled these people out of poverty yet. So they are falling in, right? You haven't got them out. Your population is still growing, and you're not able to do anything about being able to tame your population. Look, I'll close with this, right? There needs to be a Thanos bill, is what I called it, right? So I don't know if the National Assembly is going to look at this. You need, when I was growing up, there were aggressive family planning campaigns. You would see them everywhere. The rural areas need to be targeted. You need to incentivize smaller families. Like I mentioned, conditional cash transfers. How much money is going to, I mean, this is simple math. A bag of rice that you give to a family with 2 children versus a bag of rice that you give to a family with 6 children. Who's going to finish that bag of rice faster? You, with your own eyes, when you drive around the streets here in Lagos, you can see larger and larger and larger number of children begging on the streets. It is something that is taking place everywhere. We do not like to tell ourselves the truth. We do not like to face off to issues. We need to do something about our population. President Buhari, for all his economic misgivings, is speaking the truth. President Jonathan, as I said, has mentioned this, and also the chair of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. I really do hope that this is something that is addressed in the future.
All right, Rotus, so I disagree with you on a lot of things. Number one, my first position has always been population is not the problem. Most of those countries you touted, what really causes the problem for the poverty is the bad leadership. You talked about Burundi. Burundi, you had the former leader of Burundi that had a football club called Hallelujah FC. I forgot his name now. that was a tyrant against Burundi. You talked about Niger. We saw what was going on in Niger. As we speak now, as a leadership impasse going on in Niger, the military regime is coming. All right? You talked about Chad. We all know what has happened in Chad from the time of, Husni Habre, to what is happening now with after he died, his son took over the family. You talked about Democratic Republic of Congo. Do you know what they say about Congo, Rotus? They say where logic ends, Congo begins. That's what they say. You saw since the time they killed Patrice Lumumba, Congo has never been settled. You talk about Angola. You want to talk about the Savimbi wars over the years and the bad leadership, and the last leader, who is Dos Santos, whose daughter became the richest on the African continent. You want to talk about Central African Republic, anti-Balaka and Seleka rebels. All these nations you mentioned, failure of leadership. Population is supposed to be a blessing if we get leadership rights. We can't produce more and give more to the population. You're talking about a doctors-patient ratio and all of that. It's because over the years, when the doctors start to leave due to a bad economy fostered by the leaders, you are now having bad economic outcomes. And we are not churning as much doctors. Most doctors you see in Nigeria today are as good as writing plab. They want to leave because the economy was bad. But Rotus, this was the same country that the Saudi royal family used to come get their healthcare here. This was the same country that people used to leave Canada to come and give birth in Nigeria. But because of the investment in the healthcare sector from mostly diaspora, there's been a resurgence. Do you also know that because of the waiting list issues in the UK, I've had like 3 or 4 close relatives that came from the UK to come and do surgery in Nigeria because of the waiting list issues. We are not saying it's perfect, but we are saying it's also a ground for opportunities. The deplorable state of schools, the lack of completion of primary school by underage, by less than 5-year-old children, is because of the poor leadership. They destroyed the educational system in this country. If you remember the days of Babatunde Fafunwa and co. So we need to address the problem of leadership and see how we can turn this population into something that will be good.
We're talking about turning population into good. Rotus, you've represented one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is actually that population explosion or population growth, if properly handled, can actually be a huge advantage, especially for a nation like Nigeria. For instance, it's been talked about in terms of the positivity or positive impact on economic development. You have more base for labor, and of course that would expand your tax net. Unfortunately, countries like you mentioned, especially in Nigeria, I don't think we're anywhere close to where we even begin to speak about that, because one of the things, if you recall, when the president travels, one of the things he highlights as a selling point for Nigeria is the population and the fact that we have a youth population. If we're in the case, then they shouldn't use it as a bargaining chip, because at the end of the day, as Rufai rightly said, when we have good leadership and people who are able to harness what we have as an advantage, we won't be speaking at the moment about, population. Actually, I do believe that when leaders run out of ideas for how to creatively manage the economy or handle or lead, then they begin to point fingers at, things that low-hanging, or things that, is the population this time, or it is this time. That's what I truly feel in terms of regards to the leaders that you've quoted. But I do think that if we have strong leadership, we can actually harness what should be an advantage as a nation, which we haven't even yet, cut it in terms of taking advantage of it. But very quickly, I wanted to also talk about an article by the Surgeon General of the United States of America with regards to perhaps time to put a warning for the use of social media for young people. In fact, Vivek Murthy is of the opinion that in the same way where you have on cigarette packs, where you have smoking, smokers are liable to die young, that there should be the same for social media use, that it can expose young people to anxiety and depression. I think that's a conversation that we can talk about a bit further, but that's something to definitely look into as well.
Yeah, it's Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, who has written an article saying that, look, just the same way that the United States decided in 1966 to say the Surgeon General has warned that smoking can cause lung cancer, and the UK followed suit in 1971 that there is also a threat to social media, particularly how you could push young adolescents into mental depression, into anxiety. In other words, the mental risks. However, the extent to which this is the case has not been properly, documented, but there is an ongoing debate that there is a threat here. And Vivek Murthy is not alone. You recall in the UK, there's a debate about the Online Safety Act in the UK, which will come into effect in 2026. And in the United States, we've had lawsuits, taking the tech giants to court. And with Eric Adams, mayor of New York, in his own constituency, leading that conversation. But the major thing, again, that Vivek Murthy has pointed out has been the role of parents. Parents making sure, that they control how their children have access to these smartphones. And that students should not use smartphones during school hours and all of that. These are some of the suggestions made by Vivek Murthy, which I think is consistent with concerns about how abuse of social media, can affect mental health. And he even went as far as saying parents should not allow their children to use phones while eating or while in bed. Now to come to population. Now, the other time, I see you like bringing up this topic. The last time you did, I talked about population management. And it's a very complex subject because it's the connection between population and economic growth. And there are two sides to it. Now, when you have economic growth falling far behind population growth, as we have in Nigeria, then people will start giving excuses, particularly Nigerian leaders, saying, oh, it's because we have too many mouths to feed. The optimistic view of it, that's what, the word that is used, is that when you have big population growth, then that can even stimulate economic development. Those are the two sides of the argument. Now, in Africa, the problem is leadership. 60% of the African population, even more so in Nigeria, are young people. These young people, they've been produced, now they cannot find jobs. If they cannot find jobs, of course, there will be social tension. If the unemployment rate is very high, then an economic growth is not moving, fast enough, then of course there will be crisis in the society. What African leaders now say, and I don't think they mean it. Even President Tinubu said the same thing about 2 days ago, that we have to pay attention to our population. No, Nigerian leaders should not give excuses. I give you the example of China. When the Communist Party took power in 1949, under the Communist power, the population of China tripled and went close to 1 billion by the early 70s. So they started worrying about population growth and they thought they should control it. By September 1980, which is the official start date for the population control program in China, they moved from two-child policy, which was supposed to be voluntary, and then eventually by September 1980 to one-child policy. Now, the other side of the sword is that by 2022, China saw that its population had declined, the older population had increased in numbers, and then they were having issues with labor. So, China now finds itself in a situation whereby it had to be encouraging people to procreate. So it's a double-edged sword. Look at India. India has now overtaken China in terms of population. There is poverty in China, but India is growing because it has a more, optimistic, forward-oriented, government. Indonesia has a population of 279 million people. They are not complaining that there are too many because they have leadership. Now, some of the leaders may be corrupt, but at least you see the whole of that Southeast Asia axis, whether it's Singapore or Malaysia or Indonesia, you see the leaders providing opportunities. What are we doing here in Nigeria? The United States, the population is almost about 300 million. But, that population is well managed. Our leaders should not just make glib comments about, the people are the problem. We are not the problem. It is how we are managed, how the population is managed, that is the problem. Thank you very much, Rotus.